So we'll start with a simple meditation and just kind of get ourselves connected to each other, connected to the present, connected. So if you want to get yourself sitting in a way that feels really stable, just become aware of the alignment of your spine. And let your spine hold you up, as well as connect you down, as if there was a straight line going up through the top of your head, connecting you to the sky, as well as all the way down through the tailbone, connecting you to the earth. And then allow all of your muscles to soften and settle, all the tension to release and relax. Notice your joints and make sure that they're not holding or clenching any tension. And if they are, just by bringing your attention to them, allowing them to relax. And then with the sound of the bell, shift your focus to the breath. And as you watch your breath, see if you can bring a sense of joy to the ability of breathing. How fortunate it is for us to be alive, to be supported by the elements such as wind, grateful for our body's ability to integrate this air. And see if you can feel as if each breath in is giving you life, and each breath out, you are sending out vitality to others. Enriching air in, health sending out. And see if you can lift your attention out of any heaviness, and if you can pull your attention down from any scattering. Just see if you can focus in a very clear and balanced way that maintains relaxation, but is still fresh and clear. And when your focus drifts, just gently bring it back to the breath. And then as you release your focus on the breath, see if you can maintain that same bright, focused clarity. Okay. So you can relax your attention. And I thought that we would talk today a little bit about strengthening forbearance and patience. Sometimes when life becomes, I guess, in a way quieter or less busy, then sometimes that very fact can make things simplified and happy and easy, or it can make all of the things that normally are no big deal kind of amplify. So it could be that there's a few human relationships that have some tension or some difficulty, but it's just in the greater scheme of your whole life, it doesn't bother you that much. But now that life is in a way a little bit smaller and more contained because we're not going out as often, those same tensions can feel worse and more difficult. Just because life is a little bit smaller, everything else seems bigger. Similarly with any mental distress that you're having, any anxiety, any worries, any irritability, those kind of things can be a bit more when life is getting smaller as well. And any physical issues, it might be that we have some aches and pains, that we have some illnesses, but if we're very busy, they kind of go to the background and we don't notice them as much. But now that life is a little bit slower because there's less driving, a little bit slower in some ways, those same physical things can start to bother you maybe more than they normally do. So this may or may not be the case, but there's always a reason to develop more patience. So even if life is pretty good right now and you're not suffering too much, a bit more patience is always going to come in handy. So I thought we would talk a little bit about that. Excuse me. And so from a Buddhist perspective, you know, we're always subdividing and dividing things into categories to make them more easy to digest and get our head around. And so when we talk about patience, we basically are talking about issues with people, issues with suffering, or issues with our path. Those are the three things that make us lose our patience. Human beings, our own struggle, and our path, whatever that might be. So it's, you know, sounds very familiar, I think, to us to frame things in that way, that when we're not settled and content with ourselves, if we're feeling some kind of agitation, it boils down to one of those three things usually. And so I think it's interesting to just sit with when you're starting to get a little bit irritable, not like angry, not, you know, not depressed, but just like a little bit edgy, you know, a little bit irritable, or just a little bit fragile, needy, depending on your afflictive style. When we're a little off center, asking yourself, instead of what is wrong, ask yourself, what did I expect? What did I expect? What came a moment before labeling, this is not what I wanted? You know, this is not what I wanted. The neighbors weren't supposed to use the leaf blower. This is not what I wanted. There's not supposed to be loud music next to me. You know, instead of labeling, this is not what I wanted, and that's why I'm upset, look a step earlier and ask, what did I expect? Because from a Buddhist perspective, anger and dissatisfaction and suffering are very much related to attachment not getting what it wanted. And attachment from a Buddhist perspective is not the way we talk about it in psychology at all. It's talking about exaggeration. So attachment in Buddhism basically means you had an unrealistic expectation of what was possible, but it seemed true because it's sometimes possible. Yeah. So you had an unrealistic expectation that's hard to let go of because sometimes that expectation works out. And so when you're trying to, you know, use logic and reasoning to get yourself out of a bad mood, it doesn't seem to work because part of you won't let go to the fact that, well, but sometimes it works. You know, sometimes everything is quiet in the neighborhood and all I hear is beautiful birds chirping. Sometimes that happens. So then I expect that to happen. And then there's dogs barking and there's teenage boys yelling and there's children fighting and there's cats fighting and, you know, and then you're sort of upset. But what did you expect? So anger and dissatisfaction ride the tail of attachment not getting what it wanted. Attachment didn't get what it wanted, and now it's sulking. It's sulking, or it's pouting, or it's, you know, it's annoyed, it's frustrated. And so knowing what your attachments are is often enough to release them. Yeah, because as soon as you kind of name for yourself what you expected to happen and you articulate it to yourself, the fault in your logic often becomes quite clear. You know, if I say to myself, I expected a quiet neighborhood, then I ask myself, was that ever possible? How many days of the week is it quiet? How many hours of the day is it quiet? Oh, right, there was that one time 3 years ago where it was so quiet. That was the day. I love that day. And then you're expecting every other day to like shape up into that because it was possible. You know, but as soon as you articulate that to yourself, you realize that you're completely silly. And that you know, that was just a magic day that happened by chance. And so what if you were to expect, in a way, the worst? What's as noisy as it can get? What's as disruptive as it can get? What if I kind of expect that to be the case and arrange my mind and arrange my day accordingly? Then I'm not setting myself up for disappointment. And actually, I might be quite surprised, happily, that things are going so nicely. So it can sound a bit simplistic, right? To dig into, oh, attachment didn't get what it wanted, that's why I'm upset. But there's something very profound at the core of that, of naming your attachments shows you the way that they were not reasonable. Yeah, attachment thinks that the good thing, whether it's your own health or whether it's a relationship or whatever it is, it thinks that the good thing is good in and of itself. And that the good thing is good divorced from context. That it's, something that is stable and repeatable and permanent. And that's never been the case. None of that has ever been the case, and we already knew that, but our attachment holds on to that shining possibility of that one time it worked out. And then plans based on that are doomed to failure. So, if you kind of can recognize that, then instead of becoming irritable or becoming fragile or becoming a bit discontent, you're kind of just amused at yourself, and you think, my expectations were unreasonable yet again. There I go again. And you laugh yourself out of it. Yeah. And you can also connect with the fact that that's kind of what all the rest of us are doing as well. And so then you feel this shared humanity of, here we are expecting things that were never possible. Here we are doing it again, all of us in it together. We can give each other a break. Yeah, we can give each other a break because, the angriest people are not happy, are they? You know this from your work, it's obvious. Anger doesn't mean a bad person. Anger means a really sad person. This is so obvious, it's so basic. You've known it since you were 10 years old. And yet in the moment, we forget, especially with ourselves. Especially if we are a relatively mentally healthy person who is competent and stable and who other people rely on, then we can also have this added expectation on how we're supposed to be processing all of this. Because we're the healthy one, we're the strong one, we're the healer. And so all these expectations you put on yourself are possible sometimes, but they're attachment because they're not possible always. But you're expecting an always and a stability from yourself that was never possible. Yeah, and so it's not a fair thing to ask of yourself to be your most stable, most competent version all the time with conditions that are very different to normally. There's got to be an adjustment period while you build resiliency. And so developing fortitude, what we really look at with this patience idea is suffering is not always bad. Sometimes we suffer voluntarily because of what it leads to. Yeah, for example, sometimes we work long hours because we want to save up money to go on a holiday. So we're voluntarily doing a hardship because we like what it leads to. Or we're voluntarily going to the gym and putting ourselves through kind of physical exertion that's not especially comfortable, but we like that it leads to better health. So we actually do voluntarily take on suffering a lot if we like what it leads to. So you can frame then any suffering in your life as, I like what it leads to. Even if it's something I completely don't want. Even if your marriage is breaking down and your house is in a terrible mortgage and you're about to lose an arm, whatever's happening that's completely chaotic in your life, if you frame it as voluntary, you release the resistance. And the resistance is one of the things that makes regular suffering worse. So if you decide, this is voluntary, this is something I want because it is enriching for my connection of the human experience. It helps me relate to my fellow humans in a much more direct way. These are points of relation I didn't have as strongly before. I could guess what someone was going through when they went through something like this, but now that I'm going through it, I know it. And even though my experience is not exactly the same as anyone else's experience, still there's some sort of universality at the base of it, which is incredibly useful and is what I need because I am someone who wants to be a compassionate influence in this world, right? This is what we all want. We want to be a compassionate influence in this world. And so then you can feed and weave everything happening into your life back into that. You fold it in, you blend it in, and you think, okay, there's a certain degree of suffering I can't cope with yet that is really difficult and is stressful, and I can't pretend that it's voluntary, and I can't pretend that I like it. But there is a smaller degree of suffering that I've been letting steal my peace, that I actually could weave in to my path. So don't start with your biggest drama, don't start with your hardest relationship, your difficult health. Choose something that is a little annoying, just a little annoying, and see if you can weave that into your path on purpose and decide that it's a gift. And, if you work with something very small, it's empowering because you can actually do it relatively quickly. Because we're introspective people who live an examined life, it doesn't take that much work for us to choose a small annoyance and then decide to take it on the path. So once you do that, you feel empowered and you feel brave and courageous, and you realize that actually the inner strength that you have is not sort of a stuck amount that you'll run out of. Or the inner strength and resiliency that you have is something that you can grow and nurture like a plant. It's not something that just is one size forever, that you can kind of stretch your heart a bit. And so once you get better at one or two small little hardships, weaving them into your path, then you can start working on the middling ones. And gradually you blend in this ability of seeing suffering and deciding it's useful. Yeah, so it's not like you're pretending that suffering isn't suffering. You're saying it is suffering, and suffering is useful because. And so then you get these new associations in your mind, yeah, that hardship and useful become intermingled. Do you know what I mean, right? Then you have this association of this is making me stronger, thank goodness. And I don't have to work myself up to the hardest things in my life right away, but there's a lot of little things that I let myself get annoyed by or sad by that I actually don't need to pull me off course anymore. I had that strength already. I just forgot to engage it. And it's especially easy to forget to engage it when life is really shaken up and there's been a lot of changes in the details of our day. Do you know what I mean? So, there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but, one is to say it's feeding into my path of becoming a compassionate influence in this world. The other is to think, if I remember the big picture, small things naturally go to their appropriate context. Just like when you have a huge celebration in your life or a huge tragedy in your life, naturally small things don't matter. You can also become obsessed with them, right? But more often is that small things stop mattering. If you've just, there's a new baby in the family and everybody's excited about the baby and passing around the baby and there's been a baby party and it's all very exciting. Then if you have, traffic getting home, it's like, oh, well, traffic, but life, you don't care, right? Whereas if you hadn't had this kind of bigger picture trigger, then the traffic could really upset you because that's all that's happening that day, right? So if you're consciously expanding into the big picture, whatever it is, even if the big picture is just, it's not about me, it's about us, and us is maybe just my family, or maybe just my neighborhood, or just my country, or just my world, but if this is not about me, will relax you. Yeah, and it's counterintuitive, but as soon as you think, what about me? Then the world becomes very small and little things get to you. So, so do you have any arguments or suggestions about that? Or do you want to do a meditation on it? Is it too simple, too hard? Which direction? Too obvious? Too obscure?
Okay.
Yeah, look, the kindest thing we can do for ourselves is to reinforce our good qualities, because something like patience protects you. Yeah, patience protects you from suffering. It really does. And so if you actively engage it, then you have a much easier day. And more than that, the people around you are really going to suffer a lot less. Because they're not getting your irritable, grumpy, fragile, needy, whatever version, which is understandable and human and worth, being nurtured, but still is not probably their favorite version of you. If you, kind of mentally imbue yourself with this patience, it really does make for a better life. So it'll come and go, and it's treat it like a skill or a tool. Don't treat it as something that should just come naturally. Patience is a tool and a skill just like anything else. So, you just have to kind of sit with, where am I in my ability to cope with hardship? Meaning things I didn't want. Hardship is just things that we didn't want. Doesn't mean it's hard from its own side, but you've labeled it hard, so it is hard. So how do you cope with when things didn't go the way you wanted them to? And at what level do you know you could actually cope with a little bit more than what you're currently able? Than what you're currently allowing yourself. There's a baseline that you already have that still you don't necessarily, synchronize with. So sitting with that is really useful. Of, if it was really important to me, how much would I cope with, and how steady would I be? How would I hold my integrity? And how would I live my path if I made it important enough? And then what's the level that I know I just can't achieve yet? And so I'm aspiring. And I know that it's just something I need to grow into. But right now it's still in the waiting stage. Yeah. Okay, so we can do a little meditation. It's just a really gentle analysis. And, if there's any point as I do the meditation that you don't connect with, you just kind of go, interesting, and let it go. And if there's any point that really resonates, try to repeat it to yourself in your own way of speaking, in your own internal narration and the way that you have a conversation with yourself. So if I say something from the Dharma perspective and you think, yes, that has the ring of truth, that is true, then reinforce it by repeating it to yourself so it sinks in. So that's the way to approach these kind of guided meditations that are analytical, is if it doesn't feel like truth to you, you just let it go. And if it does, you reinforce and reinforce. So come back to a good posture that feels steady. And we'll now start with a motivation and think that I'm meditating on patience in order to develop it more strongly within myself so that I can be of more benefit to myself and to all sentient beings, particularly those I'm interacting with every day. And whatever peace I find, may it have a ripple effect and so just frame that motivation in your own words. And then come back to the breath for a few minutes. At first, just the breath. And then we start by thinking about patience with other people. And so in developing this kind of forbearance, this kind of inner stability and calm, try to think of the way your mind gets when it's off center. The way your mind gets when you're very upset with another person because what they did, you've decided is wrong. Maybe it is wrong, but rather than going into the story of why they're wrong, just notice your own reaction and what it does to you. Physically, how does your body get when it's irritated or angry? Mentally, do your thoughts speed up or slow into a fog? And we're not judging what the reaction is, just try to notice what it is when people don't do what you want. And then pull it a step back. Is what you wanted possible? What you wanted might have been reasonable and natural and fair, but was it possible, what you wanted? Were your expectations logical, given what you know of humanity and the inconsistencies of human behavior? Was it possible what you wanted? As stably and as often as you wanted it. And do we justify our anger by thinking they should have known better? Because sometimes they know better. And we look at ourselves just because we know better. Does that mean we're consistent? Would it be unfair of someone to expect us to always be at our best? To always consider the needs of others before our own? To always notice the needs of others? To always know what to do? Would that be a fair expectation if someone had it towards us? We know it wouldn't be fair because we are not that stable. We might be almost that stable, But 100% is not fair. Expecting 100% all of the time is not fair, because it's not possible, because no one is that focused. And then sometimes we justify our anger or our disappointment with others, thinking they didn't know better, they never know better, there's something wrong with them, they're just like that. So we can use the opposite example to be just as angry. We can be angry because they should have known better, and we can be angry because they never know better. And it feels just as reasonable. But if someone's character was to be badly behaved because of all the habits they developed in their lifetime, all the conditioning and family of origin issues, all the traumas, if they just turned out to be someone who had blind spots, is it fair to ask them to have a sudden awakening of wisdom? It would be like being angry at fire for burning you when you touch it. And so let your mind settle into the wisdom that you already know, which is that people's bad behavior comes from suffering. That suffering comes from negative states of mind, disturbing emotions. That negative states of mind, disturbing emotions, come from ignorance. And so we don't want to punish people for ignorance. We want to create conditions for their wisdom to awaken and develop. Better for them, better for us. So just let your mind settle into that knowing, framed in words that resonate with you. Allow yourself to release unfair expectations and attachments towards people, if only for a moment. And then shift to thinking about your relationship with suffering, unrelated to human relationships. Just the suffering of your own body or the suffering of your own mind. And just look at your own relationship for a minute with some objectivity, some space. When suffering arises, what are your normal responses to it? Both the healthy and the unhealthy responses. Just take a minute to examine. And so one tendency can be to deny or suppress or ignore or disassociate from the suffering, pretending it isn't there or isn't having an impact. We call it soldiering on, which sometimes is useful and makes sense in the moment, but usually leads to a backlash. If we put off looking at the suffering for too long, there's an escalation. Even if only a hardening of our heart or a habit of distraction. So just notice if that happens sometimes without judging yourself unkindly for it. Just a noticing. And then sometimes our response can be the other way, where when we're suffering, we give ourselves permission to indulge in things that we then are disappointed in ourselves for later. Something that starts out as a needed rest, that starts out as an important way to soothe oneself, and then gets its own momentum and takes over the mind or takes over the day. And at the end of that day, we're disappointed in ourselves and deflated. So just notice if that ever happens with your relationship to suffering. And it's not about judging yourself. It's about noticing that that strategy has been ineffective in relieving suffering. The behavior became something you did because it made sense at the time. Then it turned into something that no longer makes sense or helps. But then there are times when you don't distract yourself and you don't indulge, when you manage the suffering of body and mind in a healthy way. So just name those healthy responses you have to your own physical or mental suffering. Revisit your own strengths. And so take that aspect or ability that is already healthy, that already does respond well to suffering sometimes, and ask, how can I expand this ability and strengthen this tool? some small irritation or some small difficulty I might experience today. How can I weave it and blend it into my path of opening the heart, developing compassion? Just something very small and minor. Think about the resilience you already have, the qualities you already have, most of which were born from hardship. So many of the things you value about yourself grew from managing difficulties. And so see if there's a way that you can decide that everything difficult in your life right now is something useful. Or at least some of it can you frame in that way, releasing yourself from resistance to it. And then if you feel comfortable, you can add the compassionate wisdom mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum. And as you hear it or say it, feel like it fills you up completely and radiates out compassionate energy for both yourself and others, making you full and connected. Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 See if you can hear it within your mind, resonating. And feel compassionate energy then going out, connecting one by one to all your friends and family. And as this compassionate energy meets each one of your friends and family, imagine that you make a very gentle commitment. May there be peace between us. May I bring peace to you. And as you send this compassionate energy to your friends and family, imagine that it awakens their compassionate energy, which goes further and further out. All the people in their lives, all the people in their lives, further and further out, connecting all of humanity and all living beings. And holding that idea together with the mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, 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 Om Mani Padme Hum. Thanks, guys.